We should be seeking to actually ensure that higher paid jobs go to British people. And the purpose of immigration is to, or migration, is to satisfy the requirements of lower paid jobs that British citizens increasingly don't wish to do. And the government is confused about what model it is endeavoring to follow here, because in some respects, it's the Cleverly proposals will add to the difficulties of UK citizens.
Hello, I'm Brendan Donnelly. I'm the director of the Federal Trust, and I'm joined today by the chairman of the Federal Trust, John Stevens. We're going to be talking about migration, principally legal economic migration, which has been much in the news recently. Net migration to the United Kingdom has gone up significantly in recent years, and that's something which has caused great perturbation within the ranks of the Conservative Party. John, can you tell us why you think net migration has gone up so significantly in recent years? Is it possibly something to do with Brexit? Is it possible that freedom of movement, for all the criticism it attracted during the referendum in 2016, was actually a better and a better ordered system for dealing with movement, economic movement within Europe?
Well, I think one needs to start with the overall context of this, which is that Western economies in general have become increasingly dependent on cheap labor. And this has been a result of a number of things, not least the financial repression that we've had since the global financial crisis, that has meant that the need to maintain profit margins has dictated a policy of keeping wages low relative to the rewards going to capital, in essence. But Britain has had a particular problem in this, because by leaving the European Union, it has substituted what was essentially a migration, a mobility of labor policy within the EU that allowed reciprocity, that allowed also British citizens to go and work on the continent, with a policy that is really increasingly dependent on bringing in labor from underdeveloped countries, former Commonwealth countries principally. And the effect of Brexit was to essentially send home the EU citizens and replace them with those from the Commonwealth.
Will the Cleverly proposals make any difference to this?
Well, not really, because what underlies this is a lack of investment. And as I say, this is not just a British problem, but a lack of investment in domestic education and a lack of investment in health provision, which has meant that there has been particular dependency on foreign students to support our higher education system. And that has led to a preference, essentially, for having foreign students over domestic students, because they pay more. The foreign students pay more. And this has exacerbated the underlying problem of a lack of skilled labor in certain sectors, such as doctors, for example, in the UK. And it is also a feature of lack of investment in the health service, which has created a dependence on imported cheap labor, particularly in the care sector. And Cleverly's proposals are essentially a rather confused response to this, because he is targeting bringing in dependence by both cheap labor coming in for the care and health sectors and for students. But at the same time, he is raising the threshold for general immigration of so-called skilled labor by raising the threshold of the salaries that are eligible for people who wish to come and work here.
You get the impression that the thing has been cobbled together in great haste. Is that because of pressure from the Conservative backbenchers?
Well, yes, certainly. But I think that this is an enormous failure of policy, because the point about freedom of movement was that it, as I say, wasn't an immigration policy. On the whole, people came for a period, the average was actually about 5 years, and then went home. And also people who came here to work from Poland or Romania or Bulgaria, for example, did not on the whole bring their dependents, because they could go back very easily and see their dependents. And it was a totally different culture. They were coming to work and then go home. Whereas what is being substituted for that is a policy where there is a very high chance that people who come here will end up settling here. And that imposes a totally different set of issues in immigration policy, because it is fundamentally changing the long-term structure of the UK population.
Seems to me that we're looking again at the unplanned for consequences of Brexit. Are the Cleverly proposals better than the present situation, the first run of the government at a post-Brexit migration policy, or do they actually make things worse?
They don't address the problem that our higher education system, particularly courses that are strategically quite significant, like technology, higher mathematics, computer science. These are courses now which are increasingly difficult for UK citizens to access because of the dependency that so many university departments now have on foreign, principally Chinese and Indian students coming in to take those courses. And so this is a feature of a fundamental underinvestment in education, which that's the issue. And that goes on to the point that I was discussing earlier, that we should be seeking to actually ensure that higher paid jobs go to British people. And the purpose of immigration is to, or migration, is to satisfy the requirements of lower paid jobs that British citizens increasingly don't wish to do. And the government is confused about what model it is endeavoring to follow here, because in some respects it's the Cleverly proposals will add to the difficulties of UK citizens accessing higher education courses in some areas. And I think the crucial issue is whether we are focusing on the requirements of the economy, which essentially requires workers to come here but then not stay. And that is what the freedom of movement system allowed. What the government has done is create a system which is exacerbating the problems in the higher education sector, and also in the care and health sector. There's a lack of investment there is the problem. And they try to address that by also raising the minimum wage, which they've done. But that again has not had much effect. And they are now looking at means of trying to could force British workers to take jobs which they would otherwise not wish to do by addressing the benefit system in some respects. So it's a whole range of policies they're playing around with, but failing to understand the fundamental problem that they have substituted a migration policy, an immigration policy, for what was a freedom of movement migration policy.
There are hopes, pious hopes sometimes expressed, that the British market will work if there's less competition from overseas workers, to force up wages for British workers, as if this will happen spontaneously. Do you see any chance of that happening without considerable further investment in training in particular, which the government has shown no signs of wanting to undertake?
Absolutely, that's the prerequisite. That it is a very legitimate policy to try and drive up the rewards going to labour rather than to capital, because you can say that in many respects the crisis that we are now seeing, not just in Britain but in the West in general, has been due to a situation prevailing really since the fall of the Berlin Wall. I mean, of increasing rewards for capital and a squeeze, particularly on middle-class incomes, and a hollowing out of the Western middle class. But the way you drive up wages is to increase the qualification of your workforce and the skills of your workforce, and also obviously invest in technology that can increase the productivity of the workforce. And these are two very glaring failures in the UK economy, which is more serious failures than those that have prevailed elsewhere.
Was some hope expressed when Sunak brought Cameron back into the cabinet that this was an indication of attacking, as you were, towards the centre by his government, perhaps a government that would stress competence over ideology? Do you think that this marks the events of the past few days, the Cleverly proposal, mark a retreat from that hope, if there ever was a realistic hope?
But I don't see any competence in this at all. And the notion that bringing back David Cameron is going to enhance the competence level of the government, I find very very bizarre.
Very challenging.
Yeah. No, I mean the problem is that we have a need for labour. There's no question about that, as all Western economies do. But the freedom of movement within the EU is a vastly superior system for addressing that, and does not create a whole range of additional problems. And by abandoning freedom of movement, we have in fact put ourselves on a path of changing the longer term structure of the UK population very significantly in a whole range of ways. And we have not, we have used this to evade the vitally needed investment in education, and for that matter in health, but particularly in education. And we are creating a situation where in some areas British citizens are being squeezed out of education, higher education in some key sectors. And equally, we are creating an incentive for not investing in, for example, significant more training for doctors and nurses and care assistants. And that's really the path that we have set. And in my view, it's a very dangerous one.
What's been discussed up till now, both by us and mostly by the government, has been legal economic migration coming about as a result of government legislation since 2016. The government, and particularly its courtier press, have often been at pains to muddy the waters by confusing questions of refugee status with economic migration. Let's talk a little bit about Rwanda, which is to do with refugee status. James Cleverly has now supposedly has signed a treaty with Rwanda that he hopes will be able to assuage the concerns of the Supreme Court. How likely do you think that is to be successful in making legal what the Supreme Court pronounced unlegal very recently?
Well, I'm not sure I'm really qualified to judge that from a legal point of view. I think it doesn't seem to likely to work. But what underlies this is a further problem of Brexit, actually, which is that it is legitimate to seek other places for asylum seekers to come to within some very tightly defined limits of the appropriateness of those locations. I mean, for example, the Italians are considering an arrangement with Albania, with which they have some historic links. And Albania is a candidate member for the EU. The problem with Rwanda is that it's a very baroque location to take anyone to. And the other problem is that we have failed to process the asylum seekers coming here in a manner that is swift and effective. I mean, the average period, I've just come from Germany, the average period for processing asylum seekers in Germany is less than 2 months. Beyond that, there is the question of negotiating arrangements to repatriate asylum seekers whose claims are not valid. And that, again, is something where the EU is beginning to pick up on this, because the immigration issue is one that is going up everywhere. It's a feature in the United States. It's a feature across Europe, as well as here. But the EU is in a much stronger position to negotiate repatriation terms because of the leverage that it has through its trade and its aid programs, which are very significant. We have cut ourselves off from that. Our leverage in negotiating with countries that from where asylum seekers have been coming to send back those whose claims are not valid is much less and has been rendered much less by leaving the EU.
Yeah. The Rwandan government said that it didn't think that the treaty which had been signed significantly changed the existing relationship between the United Kingdom and Rwanda. So I doubt very much whether the Supreme Court are going to be very impressed by that. But is this part of a general attempt by Sunak and by the Conservative Party to motivate its shrinking base, to show that we can be tough on refugee seekers, most of whom aren't really refugees, they're economic migrants? Is that going to be a feature of our politics over the next year, do you think, of pointing out or competing to see who can be more beastly to refugees, to asylum seekers?
Well, it's certainly true that the whole refugee issue has been played up in order to disguise or to divert attention from the real issue, which is the enormous rise in legal migration, legal immigration, but this politicization, I think, is beginning to backfire, because now the focus is turning to the legal immigration figures and the longer-term implications of the structure that has now been set in place, and the confusions that have arisen that we've discussed, the conflicts in policy that have arisen. But yes, I think identity politics is here to stay. It's a feature in the United States. It's a feature across Europe. And at some point, these problems are also going to land on the Labour Party's desk, when, as seems very likely, they enter government. But I think the Conservatives are toying with the idea of fighting an election on these issues. But they have one problem, which is whether reform steals their clothes and is able to benefit from this change of focus. Now, Conservative strategists seem quite relaxed about this, because they believe that the sort of people who are going to vote for reform, say they're going to vote for reform now, and the opinion polls suggest that reform support is rising, are people who are basically conservatives. And when it comes to an election, under our first past the post system, they won't want a Labour government, and so they will still stay loyal. So they will listen to Tice and his friends, but they won't, at the end of the day, punish the Conservatives. But I think that is missing one feature, which is the very high likelihood, which we've also seen in some by-elections, of Conservative abstention simply because of this issue. And if a significant portion of 2019 Conservative voters don't vote, I mean, that has the same effect as they're voting for reform. So I think this is a dangerous strategy, but it does seem to be the one that is currently in favour, despite Cameron being brought back to supposedly produce a friendlier face of conservatism, old-style conservatism, pre-Brexit conservatism, to the blue wall in the southeast of England that is more liberal on these matters. But I think that the more immigration goes up the agenda, the more fundamentally problematic it is for the Conservative Party, and the more likely it makes a very crushing defeat. But as I say, this is an issue that is not going away. And when there is a Labour government, it will be for the Labour Party to sort out. And it could be very destructive for them too.
Finally, do you think the Conservative Party will leave the European Convention on Human Rights, or may it be committed to it in its manifesto?
I don't think they will be able to leave the Convention of Human Rights before the next general election, and I don't think they'll be in government after that. I think it is highly likely that a post-general election Conservative Party places leaving the convention as one of its platforms, but it'll be, in my view, not the most extreme. But I don't think actually they will put it in their manifesto, because I think that both Cleverly and Cameron now are fairly committed not to do that, and understand the problems that could arise from saying that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting as always. Leave you with one final thought. The idea that you need to earn £30,000 in the United Kingdom in order to bring your foreign spouse back to the United Kingdom may not be compatible, it seems to me, with the European Convention on Human Rights, with its commitment to the right to respect for family life. I haven't seen that mentioned in any of the media yet. You heard it here first on the Federal Trust.
That's absolutely right.
Thanks very much, and thank you all for listening. I hope you'll go to the Federal Trust website and see a number of similar discussions which are similarly interesting. Thank you very much.